We're going to do some introductions, and each of the panelists are going to do a short pitch. So you can take a breather, Nina, for the moment. So we'll start here. We'll do introductions. I think each person's going to talk a little bit about the topic, and then we'll come back to the audience, and you've got another chance to ask some more questions. So, Sang, if I can ask you to kick off.
Sure. Thank you very much. I wasn't prepared to introduce myself, but so, my name is Khareghani. I am Professor of Practice at King's College London. I am AI Policy Lead for the government's flagship program around responsible AI. And I was previously the founder and then leading head of the UK government's Office for AI. So my team wrote and delivered the National AI Strategy for the UK and the AI Regulation White Paper, which is currently the way that the UK is approaching regulation, or hoping to approach regulation. We're still waiting on this government's position on where we go next. And alongside all of those things, I have a number of board roles and trusteeships, which I'll talk about a little bit. And I am also an advisor in this area. So without further ado, it's lovely to be here with you, especially to talk about the future of work, which for me is an incredibly important topic. And as Nina has explained, this is such a vast area. And there are so many facets to this, and the future of work is one absolutely enormous one, which I am happy to say when I was in the government, we just kind of put on the shelf because there was lots of other things we needed to deal with, but it is firmly off the shelf now, and it is on everyone's mind. So we've also heard that AI has been around for a long time. In fact, the term artificial intelligence is having its birthday this year. It'll become 70. But what we think of as AI has only come into popular view about maybe a handful and a half years ago. And there's arguments about when that started. But since then, there has been a lot of hope. There's been a lot of hype, and there's been a lot of emphasis placed on AI. From the potential of huge economic gains in productivity to incredible advances in scientific discoveries from medicine to manufacturing. And you've heard Nina go through some of this, and it brings to light kind of how enormous this is and how much hype and how much expectation there is from these technologies. And because these technologies are pervasive, the scale and the pace of change that we're seeing is completely astronomical. It's completely crazy. So we've got this massive technological advances and massive innovations. We've also got this eye-watering sheer scale of spending that is happening in R&D and infrastructure, both at private as well as government levels. And it feels unrelenting. So every single time you turn the TV on, you turn on the radio, you read something online, it is about AI. But it's also incredibly rewarding and exciting. So I agree with Nina, to be living through this period, right? Because it's really interesting. And we've got a lot of things to deal with and a lot of things to think about. A lot of work ahead of us. So we know that AI technologies aren't going away. They're here to stay. And you'll hear me talking about them as AI technologies because AI is not one thing, right? And I think one of the pitfalls is that we tend to think of it as one thing. And when you talk about AI and someone else hears you talk about AI, you're not actually talking about the same thing. And when it comes to scientists, AI is everything we haven't figured out yet. The things we have figured out, we just call by the application name, right? So Google Maps, right? We used to print out how to get from someplace to somewhere else on MapQuest. Left at, whatever. Now we've got Google Maps and you've got a little blue dot that tells you exactly where to go. So we know they're here to stay, and we know that the adoption of these technologies are right at the cusp of really taking off. If we back ourselves and say that we're going to get adoption right, even a little bit, that means there's going to be an incredible deal of impact across our societies. And it is our collective responsibility to make sure that that impact is as positive as possible, and we have to mitigate against the risks. One area for that impact is, of course, the future of work. So we're asking questions like, what will work look like? What will it feel like? What will it be in the future? How do we train for it? What are the skills we need? What jobs will be created? What jobs will be destroyed? What are the labor market impacts? And what role do we as individuals, as corporations, as academics, and as policymakers have in building the infrastructure to support this new future of work? So a lot of people from across the ecosystem are looking at this question. We've got government, civil society, industry, academia, everybody looking at this. I have the great honor of being a trustee for the Institute for the Future of Work, who is working at the intersection of all these areas. They're trying to carry out research and to share findings around some of these important questions. At the Institute for the Future of Work, we just completed a 3-year review called the Pissarides Review. And this examines the impacts of automation on the labor market. So it's really thinking about who is benefiting and who is being hardest hit by the disruptions that are being caused. The review proposes a new model of human-centered automation, a way to adopt technologies using a socio-technical approach. So kind of answering some of the questions that have been previously posed about how, right? We've shown in this review that not only is technological transformation highly interconnected and interdependent with socioeconomic change, but also that taking a human-centered approach is positively correlated with A, the successful adoption of new technologies, but also creating happy employees who have a positive mental attitude towards their new jobs, which is kind of where we all want to be. The report takes you back to the basics. It talks about what defines work, which is essentially a combination of social contact, relationships, and purpose. It also looks at the impact of technological automation, which is not just on the individual or on the firm, but also on the system. I'm not going to go through everything because there is a lot of recommendations, so I urge you to read the report, or at least the executive summary, because I know that everyone's short on time. Or actually just ask ChatGPT to summarize it on your behalf. But at any rate, you can find it on iofow.org. I will highlight 2 quick findings for you. The first is, and some of this will sound like sucking eggs, but now you have data to back this up if you need to sell this on up to the rest of the organization. The first is, automation is having significant impacts on people's work and their well-being. So these go beyond the task or job substitution, and they look at new impacts that aren't currently measured, such as job quality, creation, access, worker well-being, both in the negative and the positive sense. And in fact, upskilling and the substitution of routine tasks or dangerous tasks, which are often used to signal, we're making things better for our employees, can't be assumed or taken for granted and have to be proactively shaped and communicated and worked out with the employees right from the beginning. The second is the skills are changing across sectors. Who'd have thought that? We reviewed 65 million job adverts from 2016. And this shows that there's an increased emphasis on the importance of communication skills, critical thinking, and creativity. So you'll hear some of this replicating the things that Nina said earlier, right? As well as tech and digital skills. So you want these kind of more human skills as well as also being able to be a technologist. We also highlight similar characteristics, similar skills. These are skills that are now appearing across a whole bunch of different job families and occupations, regardless of which sector they appear in. And finally, we have something called skills diversity, which is increasing across the board. So this is about combining social and technical skills to cope and shape transitions and succeed in today's environment. So we don't want you just to be good at tech anymore. We want you to be able to speak every language, right? So this is that whole interdisciplinary perspective, right? These are the changes we're seeing in the skills that people are looking for. So I'll just summarize and say that AI and automation can lead us to a fairer future of better work. But the attitudes need to change, and trust has to be built from the outset. We have to address the risks and the fears that these technologies bring. Studies have shown that people are feeling more and more anxious and insecure when it comes to their work. And these perceptions are their reality, which means that they affect both positive adoption and positive outcomes. So if you're not addressing the fact that your teams feel insecure, they won't use the tools. And if they don't use the tools, all the money you put in place to put the tools there goes to waste. So you don't see any of the productivity gains. And trust only comes when you take your workforce on this journey with you. And I'm not talking about a tick box exercise. This is actually being transparent, going through this with them, and really embracing and showing a real commitment to create better work for them. So I feel like I've spoken for a very long time, so I'll pause.
Perfect. Thank you. Anna, on to you.
Thank you.
I know you've got a slide as well, I think.
Yes, I do. So a quick background on me is I'm the head of AI at Multiverse. I'm an AI researcher by training, so I studied computer science at Stanford about 10 years ago. Following that, I actually started a company. So I had an AI company in 2018 where we built models to help understand skills. It was a talent intelligence platform, which was acquired by Multiverse last year. Following that, I joined as head of AI. My role follows 3 buckets. One is I lead a team of AI engineers, and we're actually developing AI systems in the company into our product. The second is I'm working on an internal AI adoption initiative. It seems very relevant to our talk today. And the third is I get to speak to our customers and implement and operators like you all to help with AI transformations. Given the relevance of Multiverse, I did prepare a few slides that I'm happy to walk through. A quick context on Multiverse is that we are an upskilling platform specifically focused on AI and tool adoption. We were founded in 2016. The first tranche of skills that we focused on was really data literacy, right? So actually a lot of the emphasis on AI today replicates the attention that was on data just 5 to 6 years ago. We currently work with over 1,500 companies and over 22,000 learners, specifically to help with upskilling. And today, actually, over 10% of our learners are already focused on AI skills. So the pace of AI transformation is really extraordinary. Some lessons I can share from the field is really this idea of the race has been mentioned a lot today. And the race is on to upskill in AI. So we know that AI is revolutionizing business, skills being the center, right? We know that it's about the people, not just the technology on the macro level. Second, a lot of studies have come out recently from HBS, just in the last 90 days, that AI can help employees deliver 40% higher value and 20% faster. And finally, there's just this growing recognition. In fact, almost 90% of businesses recognize that their workforce today really needs AI skills. But there are some challenges. Only 6% of businesses have begun meaningful upskilling on AI. Multiverse just published our 2025 impact report yesterday, and we found that actually 50% of employees have received fewer than 5 hours of training in AI. In fact, most of that training comes from chatting with ChatGPT directly, right? And based on what we've heard today, that's just simply not sufficient. What are the barriers? So a lot of companies have come to Multiverse asking for guidance because they just don't really know how to navigate. They don't know where to start. Second, they have a lot of diverse needs. We've talked a lot about the interdisciplinary aspect of AI, and they just don't know how to bring that all together. And the third aspect is about real-world application. So we heard from the keynote that institutions for children, right, are starting to reimagine what does the role of education look like. But what about the people like us who are already in the workforce? And I think a lot of our training and our learning needs to be adapted for that. So it seems like this is the common theme for today. AI success or failure will depend on people and the skills that they have. Why? Because you need the people to understand how data is essential for AI strategies and how to implement that. And then secondly, you need people to have skills to explain why. Why does AI matter? And what is the business case around that? I do want to share a successful case study. So we partnered with a multimedia company based in the US for 3 months. They came to us because they recently purchased an AI tool, Copilot, but the usage in their corporation was less than 10%. Over a 90-day period, we were able to achieve 3 times more usage of AI for every employee on teams that were partnered with us. In fact, we launched over 170 projects completed with AI, saving the business 5,000 hours and creating a flywheel effect of getting more and more employees excited about AI. So I'll leave you with the lessons. The lessons of this at scale is fourfold. We call this MAGE. So number 1, if you're trying to implement AI, focus on measurement, connect the impact of AI to the business outcomes. Number 2, applied. It has to be in the day-to-day work, otherwise it's adding more to people's already full plates. 3, guided. A lot of research and our work on the field has shown that when you have coach and AI together helping every employee, it's more effective. And then finally, broadening reach, right? Don't silo the usage or implementation of AI. Allow individuals across all career stages to apply AI into their day-to-day work. So I'll end here with a note of optimism. So I'm somebody who studied AI 10 years ago. Sometimes I even feel like my knowledge is outdated. What that means is we're all in this race together, and I think we're actually closer to the starting line than we think, which means that now is absolutely the right time to get started, and there's a lot that we can do going forward.
Brilliant, thank you. And then finally, Hamish, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. I think I'm still processing some of the excellent keynote from Nina and the points the other panellists have raised. I'm Hamish Woodhead, and I head up the UK digital workplace business for Fujitsu, and I guess I'm in a privileged position today of bringing some male diversity to the panel. So I'm just going to talk to a few data points from some analysis and a survey that Fujitsu conducted across several European countries. And the study really focused on just one facet of AI, really, looking at generative AI and its usage across organisations. So we had over 3,500 responses that came back, not just from senior level leaders, but also from middle management, from junior operatives, right the way through organisations and employees in the workplace. And I think some of the data points really capture, and I'll try to bring it to life with real world examples of what we see within our business and our clients' business today. So the first data point that came out, which was really surprising to me, and contrary to what I expected, was about the demographic of who's adopting generative AI usage in the workplace. So the smallest percentage was in the 18 to 26-year-old bracket, which kind of blows the theory that we're all fed around the kind of Gen Z, millennials, and the largest percentage being in the age group that I unfortunately fall into, which is 45-year-olds and onwards. So I then started to reflect a little bit about on the results and thinking about how that plays out in reality. So I guess rather like numerous people in this room, you have children. I have a daughter who's in her teens. Myself and Sana were talking before about the fine balance between a digital footprint, but also exposing them to the skills that they will need to be able to hit the ground running when they join the real world. And the one thing that I really regret giving as a piece of advice to my daughter right now, and I didn't realise it for years, was no question's a bad question. The only question that doesn't get asked is the silly one. Because the bit that I forgot to add on to the end was, who? Who do you ask and what do you ask? Because right now I'm in the situation where she comes to me for everything. And I don't know the answers. And I guess I show my some of the skills that I need to develop in taking her on the journey, because my obvious response of have you asked Google, have you put it in Copilot, frankly doesn't seem to cut it with a teenage daughter at this stage. So more work to do there. But then I think about when I started work, and actually not knowing the answer was seen as a sign of weakness. And it wasn't talked about, but Google, other search engines are available, became my best friend. And then, a number of years ago, that's evolved to Chat AI. So that was quite fascinating for me to see, and it wasn't what I expected at all. The next thing is around productivity. So of all the people that responded to the survey, the average increase in productivity that people were prepared to commit to in the survey was just under 5 hours a week. So just let that sink in for a second. 5 hours per week. So some quick math says to me that's nearly a calendar month of everyone's time each year that can be done with productivity gains. That's huge. That's huge. And much as CFOs, if there are any in the room, or CFOs that you work with, will be quick to produce a prorated business calculation, I think organisations that focus solely on what the cost saving will be will very quickly enter into a race to the bottom. This is about how can we repurpose that. And, Anna briefly talked about the 5 hours of training. Well, why not use that 5 hours of productivity and reinvest it in training, reinvest it in well-being initiatives? So that was quite interesting. So there you've got some of the challenges. You then move forward and say, and it was reflected, I think, in one of the earlier slideware that talked about the intent. So of all the respondees, 82% said they were really positive about the use of AI. But you go back to the data point that says the maximum amount of people that are using it is 1 in 5, but 80% are positive. So we have that opportunity in the middle ground. People want to be there, but they don't know how to be there just yet. And then the final piece of data that I'll share today was around senior level C-suite executives who are frustrated about the pace in which AI is being implemented across their business. And I guess that will be no surprise to a lot of people in the room, be that through regulatory challenges, be that through risk adversity, or other things. So what you've got is this interesting scenario developing where there's opportunity, there's a desire, there's an intent, but there's not quite a knowledge yet of how to get there.
Excellent, thanks Hamish. Okay, we'll open the floor again for some questions. Quickly digest all of that. I know these are big concepts that we're talking about here, and a lot to take in. But if you could quickly compute all of that, and then we've got about 15 or so minutes to take some questions. If we could start over there, please.
Amazing panel. Thank you. Is that on?
Yeah.
I'm mentoring a CEO who his startup is working out how organizations actually make decisions using AI, which, spoiler alert, is not hierarchical. But the question he's asking himself is, for every person that I hire as I scale, how do I hire 5 AIs in equivalent? So sort of double question is that a sensible question? And if so, how do you go about that?
Who would like to pick that up? Anna.
I'll take a stab. I think right now there are a lot of AI tools out there that are going after specific verticals, right? So a recent startup that I've been talking to is trying to build like a site reliability engineer. I would say if you zoom out, the state of AI today is not ready to be fully autonomous, but I think the near-term approach is actually to think about the tasks that roll up to every job, right? So today we hire, when we put out a job description, we list out bullet points on what someone's expected to do. I think I see AI being able to take away certain bullets out of that list, allowing the human to take on more critical thinking and strategic roles. And so instead of saying hiring 5 AI employees, it's actually more about 5 AI co-pilots for your 5 employees who can then branch out and take a more broad range of responsibilities.
Can I come in?
Yeah, please, Sana, add.
So I think I would take a step back from this and ask what the CEO is doing, right? Like, what is the company providing? What is, is this a tech-first company? What is the product? Right, and how are they defining that product? Because I think we run into this thing as this position very quickly of anthropomorphizing AI and making it a human. It's like, okay, well, I've got one AI sitting there, and then human, AI, human. Well, actually, if we get to the point where we've got artificial general intelligence, why do you need more than one? Right? Like, why do you need more than one? Like, if we've got this superhuman thing that can like answer every question that we could ever think of and can do it, like, why do we need more? Why does that CEO need to hire 5 of them, right? So I don't know if that's the right way of thinking about it, right? I think if you think about tech, or if you think about companies that are AI first, right? Like Ocado is a really good example of this, right? Ocado is a food company. They're food retail, but they're not a food retail company. They themselves will self-identify as a tech company because technology runs from the beginning to the end of what they do, and it's completely data-driven, right? And everything they do and every slack they take out at every point of that space is driven by data and AI technologies that run that loop that Nina showed, right? That's the way to think about it, rather than, I'm going to have one and, or think about it the way that we just talked about, which is augmenting humans with tools like large language models, one case of which is Copilot.
Just to add to that, and I think it's what Anna was touching on, already right now you're starting to see the rise of very successful companies like Cursor, which is basically an AI coding company where they already have over 100 ARR and they have a pretty small team, right? But like Anna was saying, I don't think it's a silly question. I think it's a really good question because you're starting to see the birth of these companies which are extremely successful where the team is quite small and they're working right now with these tools and these capabilities, but as I hope came through in my speech, the biggest mistake you could make as a founder or a business is build for today's capabilities. You have to build for what's coming next. And as I already said, kind of with the Anthropic example, we perhaps are heading in a world in near future where it isn't possible today, but where you do have agents who are more autonomous, who can operate through different workflows. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a human in your company, but I do think that the reality is that you will have AI agents that are increasingly autonomous that can handle complex workflows. So, and perhaps like the UK is going to be a great example of that because one of the interesting things, having come from a policy background and then going into technology, is you sometimes see the unintended consequences of policy. So recently, the kind of tax rises, right? I don't think they've come into effect yet. National insurance contributions going up where it's very difficult to, just come in, right. So that may mean that the UK is actually a market where you actually see this new hybrid model of company being adopted much faster because of how expensive it is to actually bring on a new employee. That, of course, doesn't mean that there's going to be no more jobs or anything like that. It's not a zero-sum game, but this approach that your CEO is getting at, this kind of hybrid model, this Centaur team, I think is absolutely critical, and I think it's where we're heading. Again, don't build for today's capabilities, but look at where we're going.
Do you want to add anything, Hamish, or shall I?
Only that I thought the first step, they'd already made that first mindset change. They were thinking in those terms rather than thinking in build and convert. That was my reflection on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. More questions from the audience. Down here at the front, please.
Morning, and thank you, panel. That's been really insightful so far. Now, in my experience in talking to colleagues in industry, we always find that, well, not everybody's an Ocado or a Tesla, right? That's a small outlier in all the organizations in existence today. So they're always structured in silos. You have a chief product officer, chief financial officer, and they know their domains well, but very few people understand the organization end to end. So there's naturally friction around something that Nina showed about, saying your pilots are always going to be vertical, not horizontal. How do we create new roles for like more general managers who can support AGI? And how do we build this trust in organizations where we can share data across the enterprise, across all levels? Because sometimes I worry, do I really share what I see with the graduates coming in my organization? I mean, how will they respond to that data?
Absolutely. Agents and building trust. Who would like to take that on?
I can start us off maybe, and then people can disagree. I think there are phases, or at least this is what I've seen so far, is that especially in traditional companies, this shift is happening in phases. So phase one is where your people are using these things to augment themselves. And they are, and you need to have some kind of awareness of that. There should be some policies. Otherwise, it's a daily news, Daily Mail headline waiting to happen. So you've got some reputational risk to protect, but that's kind of the first one. And it doesn't disrupt anything, but it does give you some minimal productivity gains and stuff. The second one is when business units start doing that, right? They start interrogating at a business unit level, how do we use technology to improve, augment, shift, change, etc. And then phase three is when you're looking across the company and you're actually doing this driven by the data and then you're creating brand new products or brand new services or completely disrupting your company. No one is there. Like the only people who are there now are the tech companies themselves. So if you look at the tech companies themselves, they're the only ones who are using their data to move into a new space. There's all sorts of reasons why this isn't happening and why companies are doing this in pockets and rather than across. And one, I would posit, is the lack of regulation in this space, that lack of feeling comfortable that you're not going to get wrapped on the knuckles, somewhere down the line. Or again, the kind of risk of what these systems might entail down the road. Now, that isn't to say this isn't being looked at and there isn't a ton of research and there is a ton of work being done at companies and at the labs of these private companies to kind of get past this. But without it, you still have this worry. So a good example of that is JP Morgan's CEO, who just said, I think 2 days ago, watch out. Like you're going too fast. And this is coming from, they've spent $2 billion on AI R&D, right? But in terms of how much they've actually adopted, it's very small, right? And so I think there is this position, which is why we're right at the start, right? Mm-hmm. But this doesn't mean it's not going to change.
Anybody else? Anna?
I can share a real-world example just to provide some light. I think a lot of what was shared is spot on, and how that comes true. So a company like Multiverse is, we do have a tension between the legal side, right? We have, I'm reminded a lot that we have a lot of contracts with customers, right? And they want to know that we have a responsible AI governance policy and that we have a very clear understanding of the AI tools that we're adopting, and that the data that we're providing to these tools are highly regulated and within a sandbox. On the flip side, we have a risk-on appetite from the C-suite and our tech organization because the pace of AI is extraordinary, right? AI tools are coming out week over week. And so if we lock down the tools that we're using today, then we're missing out on the potential upside of tomorrow. So the way that we're trying to balance this and early is we've formed a department AI champions working group. So we've handpicked folks from around the organization. Everybody is represented. We put an expectation of department leaders. They need to be speaking on a monthly basis with their AI champion. And this AI champion committee becomes this initial triage for AI tool requests. And within this working group, we have almost like a top-down interdisciplinary tiger team that's finding opportunities in every pocket of the business. Ask me in 6 months how this goes, right? It's early days, but this is how we're trying to thread the needle. Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything before we take?
Just briefly going to add that I think they're all intrinsically linked, the questions, in terms of you need to understand what's the strategy we're trying to achieve in order to put a strategy in place to underpin it. And I think as soon as you start thinking away from the terms of proof of concept, proof of value, that's been done, right? These products are already proven. So having these small scale incubations, I think, really is a thing of the past. I was working with a client in the week who wanted a proof of value. We've already done a proof of value. Now it's about how do we land it? And you know, I heard language earlier about being bold, about being bullish. And that for me is exactly what it's about. That doesn't mean that you can't be acknowledging of risk, acknowledging of legislation, but you've got to be bold. And I think that's in the decision making around the strategy that perhaps we talked around previously.
How are you offering that kind of comfort to customers, some of whom might be in the room, and are, you know, they've done that first phase and they now know that they need to take some big, bold steps forward? How do you help them do that? How are you helping to build that confidence and trust and, you know, get them to open the purse strings a bit more so to enable that?
Well, I think it's multifaceted as well, isn't it? So there's a kind of strategic senior level discussions, and then there's more operational ones. And where I see the operational stuff, it's about taking people on the journey to kind of reassure them that their role changes. So again, the example of working with a client in the week on a fairly rudimentary proof of value exercise, you know, overhauling and synergizing their knowledge articles, right? So really basic stuff. But the concern from the people operating that on the ground was about, you know, what does this mean for me and my team? And clearly the client had given that no consideration whatsoever. They responded on the hoof, and much to their credit, it was about, well, you know, your role changes and we're going to invest in you and your team, and you're going to become the experts across our organisation. So I think it's where that bit meets the strategy, and that then provides the compelling business case to talk about that customers then want to spend money putting in place solutions that underpin where they want to move to.
Yeah, because actually what I've heard here is that the human is integral.
Absolutely.
To this. But if you think about, you know, the person on the street, for them AI fills them with fear that it might mean that they may lose their job. So there's that kind of juxtaposition between what the experts see as a huge potential here for people in work versus what the person on the street or the employee in the company might feel. Excellent. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. Alexandra.
I'll make it quick. Hamish, you spoke about productivity gains. We've heard about government policy and we've heard about hybrid models. Given the impact that could have on GDP, should we have a robot tax? Should we have an AI levy? And if we do, how should it be reinvested?
Great question. I think that ties back to some of the big themes that I was talking about, which is that the situational awareness here is that this isn't just about workplace transformation or business optimization or productivity gains. It's almost like an all society macroeconomic change that's coming our way. And obviously, my instinct when I went all in on AI in 2017 and I started working with technologists, I'd actually come from a policy background, and I got very frustrated of working with policymakers and started to work with technologists instead. But now we're coming full circle, right? Where already since ChatGPT came out, this has been the dominant policy conversation across the world. I would say, though, having looked at some of the regulation efforts and looking at how this is unfolding across different markets and different parts of the world, is that sometimes, and I agree, we absolutely need to have policy and think about ideas like, often things are floated like the robot tax or UBI, but sometimes they also have unintended consequences. And I can give you a real example now, going back to, I already mentioned how perhaps the UK will be a market where automation and increasingly autonomous systems take off faster than in other parts of the world, thanks to kind of the tax rises on national insurance contributions. But even on a very macro geopolitical level, what the US did under Biden, starting under Biden and then accelerated under Trump, was these export controls on technology, right? Because they did not want this critical technology, i.e. semiconductors, to fall into the hands of Chinese companies, because they saw this as an extreme kind of competition and dangerous kind of strategic imperative. But one is already seeing how those policy imperatives are backfiring in the sense that they've incubated this incredible innovation, and going back again to the fundamental question we are debating here about workforce and skills and people that are valuable. 50% of AI researchers are in China, so you can't there's this question about like how policy and innovation mix and kind of the backfire effect that might happen. So I think whilst policy and regulation is important, I also think it's really important to allow this technology to be used by people in a way where we already talked about companies like Cursor, or Anna's from Silicon Valley, so she'll be attuned to all the debates that are happening in Silicon Valley right now about who's going to build the first unicorn with just one employee, right? So there's new ways of doing business, new ways of creating value, new ways of creating wealth, and I think sometimes a very kind of legacy system of viewing this from a regulatory perspective can actually backfire in ways that are really not productive.
Excellent, thank you. I think it's going to be Anna that builds that first one-person unicorn, actually, based on... Listen, that's brought to an end our first panel session. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel. We're going to head out for coffee now, but if you could join me in giving them a nice big clap.